Oh, wonderful. Okay, so thank you all for joining. This is the last in the Shvatim series, as Rabbi Kalman said before. We have an Elul break and then a Chag break, and then resume, yes, with the Bnei Rachel, with Yosef, Menashe, Ephraim, and Binyamin. So today we have the heavy but enjoyable task of rounding off the Bnei Leah with her final son, Zvulun. And so we spent last week talking about Zvulun's older brother, Yisachar, the farmer slash Ben Torah. And now we move on to Yisachar's younger brother, who ends up eclipsing him, and that is Zvulun. Let's look at the circumstance of his birth. Vatahar od Leah vateled ben shishi liyaakov. So Leah gives birth to a sixth biological child, essentially her eighth child, because we consider Gad and Asher those sons who were born to Zilpah. Again, I like the expression I keep on using, whom Leah conceived of, though she herself did not conceive these sons. She brought them into existence. But this is the sixth child from her womb, right off of the heels of Yisachar. So if Yisachar's birth circumstance was born from a strong confidence and a claim on Yaakov, here we round off Leah's deep desire to be connected to her husband, which we saw following through as the continuous pattern from the birth of her first son, Reuven, up through the birth of Zvulun here, in her naming of this sixth and final son. Vatomer Leah, Zvadani Elokim oti zeved tov. Hapa'am yizbeleni ishi ki yaladati lo shisha banim. So this is a very heavy verse, but we're used to that already. We know that not only does Yaakov like wordplay, but his wives do as well. And so this is a naming of a son that is chock full of difficult, abstruse language and clearly a lashon nofel al lashon, a wordplay. Zvadani, Zeved, Yizbeleni, Zvulun, a lot of zv words, Zion bet words, even though clearly here we see two different roots, Zion bet Dalid and Zion bet Lamed, still we hear the zv echoing throughout this verse. So what could this verse mean? Zvadani Elokim oti zeved tov. Now there seems to be very little machloket, very little disagreement as to what Zion bet Dalid means. Zeved seems to mean a delightful portion, a gift, a choice portion. And here I'm just following Rashi's footsteps. Rashi says Zeved Tov. You want to understand what Zeved means? Just look at the Targum. Ketargumo. It's exactly as Onkelos and Targum Yonatan understands it, a good portion. So here in the footsteps of Gad, Asher, Yisachar, Zvulun, all named after something positive. Gad, an unexpected fortune. Asher, a continuing, more gentle abundance. Yisachar, an earned reward. And here's Zvulun, also a Zeved, a gift, something choice and wanted. Zvadani Elokim oti Zeved Tov. God has gifted me with a choice portion, with a choice gift. Hapam. Okay, so that's as far as Zeved is concerned. Which, by the way, it's a weird word. All of the Zion words I find to be very odd because they just, Zion is that letter that just doesn't seem to fit so comfortably within the alphabet, the way other letters, which seem to be far more common, are. Zion is one of the rarer letters, and Zion Bet Dalet is a rare form. But we've heard it before. It's entered our parlance. If you are familiar with the ritual upon the birth of a baby girl, a zeved bat is something that you might have heard of in our modern times. It's actually a 17th century name for the ceremony, the official ceremony, not just the party or the kiddush that we generally do upon the birth of a baby girl. Simchat bat is how many people call it nowadays, or kiddush. But Zeved Bat specifically was the name that was given by Italian Jews and Sephardi Jews back in the 17th century. I guess perhaps if one looks in Italian Sidurim, or I'm not sure exactly where we would source it, but I do know that much that it's hundreds of years old, this term, and it is the gift of a girl. And there's an official tekes that one follows. Now, in just a few minutes, we'll explore why the ceremony, the tekes, is called a zeved bat, but it's rooted in the same notion of a choice gift. Zeved bat, God has given us a choice blessing of this new baby girl. So Leah is saying, God has gifted me this choice portion. Hapam yizbileni ishi. Now, this translation, which I just chose randomly, is now my husband will exalt me. Ki yaladati lo shisha banim. Now, this translation, by the way, doesn't follow Rashi, and it doesn't follow most of the Mefarshim. It's actually it's a translation that actually it follows the Medrash, but we'll get to how most of the commentators understand this verse. Not that my husband will exalt me, but we'll see what Rashi says in a second. But he will. It's clearly something positive. My husband will lift me up, for I have borne him 6 sons. And she calls his name Zvulun. So it's a positive name, it's a positive connotation, and this positivity will carry through in the few markers that we have about Zvulun, namely the blessing that Yaakov gives him and the blessing that Moshe gives the tribe. Now let's look at Rashi to understand how most of the Mefarshim, who are going to follow Rashi's lead, and here we're talking about those who precede Rashi, Targum Onkelos, Rav Saadia Gaon, those who follow Rashi, the Ibn Ezra, Rashbam, Bechor Shor, all basically followed the same interpretation of what Leah is saying here. Now they say that Leah says, God, you have given me a good portion. Pam yizbaleni ishi, hapam yizbaleni ishi. Now my husband will dwell with me, because the root Zayin Bet Lamed in Rashi's understanding means a dwelling place, Beit Madur, a domicile. Me'ata, Leah is saying, from here on in, lo tehei ikar dirato, ela imi. From now on, I shall be the permanent bayit. I shall form the context of Yaakov's home. Sheyesh li banim keneged kol nashav, because I have as many sons as all of his wives put together, meaning that even though Rachel had not yet born her 2 sons from her womb, Yosef and Binyamin, still there were 4 other sons that were not from Leah's person, and so here she is eclipsing all of Yaakov's other sons with her own progeny. So she is forming the bulk of his household. So going back to how Rashi would translate this, God has given me a choice gift. Now my husband will dwell with me. Hapam yizbaleni ishi. If this had been my hope through the births of all of my other sons, now it is something that is secure. I have borne 6 sons for him. I have ki yaladati lo shisha banim, and she calls his name Zvulun. Now, before we go on to other ways to understand her naming here, I want to point something out, and that's what I alluded to when I first was listening to Leah's naming of her son. And again, I pointed out throughout all of the shiurim that the mothers always name the sons. Leah and Rachel always name the sons, with the possible exception of Levi. And when we get to Binyamin, we'll see that both Yaakov and Rachel give him a name. But it's always the mothers that so deeply imprint even the tribal concept on their babies when they are first born. So Leah here is using a lot of the Zion Bet words. And I don't think I bring it here for you. No, I don't. But if we were to look at Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, who I bring often for his very insightful understanding of the Hebrew language. Rav Hirsch, on the verse in the book of Exodus, so the third chapter, the eighth verse, which talks about the land of Israel as Zavat Chalav Udvash, a land, what does that mean? Zavat, flowing with milk and honey, which normally I guess one can think of as a cornucopia, right? Like or perhaps a gentle river. That's what that word in English tends to evoke within us, not something abrupt or in any way damaging, but zavat seems to be flowing. Now, Rav Hirsch says no. The word the root zayin bet means an abnormal flow. I see that my screen is frozen, but you can all hear me, right? My voice doesn't cut out. My
You're
screen might freeze for a few.
fine.
Okay.
Fine. We can
Yeah.
see. And
Okay, excellent. Okay, so Zav means an abnormal pathological type of flow, which is why there is a category of one who becomes ritually impure, called for the male a Zav and a female a Zava, indicating some kind of a pathological emission, and not something that is deemed physiologically normal. So Zav means at its root a curious abundance, not something that is anticipated. So when we hear Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, let's do away with images of these gently flowing rivers of milk and honey, and instead think of just an abnormal abundance of wealth. That's what the word zav indicates. So in this case, in the naming of this child, she is, through her play on the Zion Bet words, Zion Bet Dalid, Zion Bet Lamed, Zvadani, Zeved, Yizbaleni, Zvulun, she is highlighting the abnormality of this situation that she has borne six sons to Yaakov, over and against the shvachot of each born two, and Rachel, who remains barren. So with that in mind, we can go to the second word, Yizbeleni Ishi, which Rashi had translated as a domicile, as dwelling. Now my husband will dwell with me, which is the simplest way to understand it. But there are many ways to say dwelling. And this particular permutation, Zion Bet Lamed, indicates a different type of dwelling, which is why we saw the translation of now my husband will exalt me. It indicates a palace. Let's look at we're not going to look at all six examples throughout Tanakh of the root Zion Bet Lamed. It's a hapexagon, and it doesn't happen very often. Only six times do we see Zion Bet Lamed as a word throughout the Bible. But let's just look at a few here in the book of Kings. Bano baniti beit zvul lach. I have built for you a house, but not just a house. We're talking about a house of God. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, is speaking here, and he's talking about the Beit HaMikdash. So it's a Beit Zvul, means a stately abode, an exalted abode, not just a house, but an exalted house. Machon l'shivtecha olamim. This is echoed in the book of Isaiah, Habet mishamayim ure'eh, where the prophet calls upon God and says, look down from the heavens and see. Where are you looking from? Mizvul katshecha v'tifartecha, from your holy and exalted abode. You dwell on high, but it's not that you're dwelling in a hovel, you're dwelling in your palace, as it were, God. And so Zevel, Zion Bet Lamed, does mean an abode, but specifically it means an it means an exalted abode. And this is attested to, by the way, in the cognate languages. I don't dwell on that a whole lot because linguistically, I is not language is not my, well, biblical Hebrew is not my forte. But when someone it points out to me that there are cognate comparisons to be made. In other words, if there's a word in Tanakh that's difficult to understand, but we have examples in other Semitic languages like Akkadian, like Aramaic, like Ugaritic, that might help us, ancient languages, obviously, that might help us understand the difficult word in Tanakh, then it behooves us to go in that direction. And so I have an example when it comes to Zayin Bet Lamed of a cognate in Ugaritic, which very clearly means a prince and one who is elevated or one who is raised up. So one can look back at the translation of what Leah is saying here and say, this time my husband will dwell with me the way we had seen dwelling, or dwell with me comfortably, or my husband will exalt me, right? They will lift me up, will esteem me beyond that which we've already established in our years-long relationship. So all of these kinds of feed into each other in the sense of I am secure now with my husband in a way that I hadn't been before. One other wonderful, nuanced way of understanding this verse, or her naming again, is the way that it's used, the way that the word Zayin Bet Lamed is used in modern Hebrew. Zevel means garbage, right? Which you would say, well, that's not, that runs counter to how we've been understanding it. We're not understanding Hapam Yizbaleni Ishi, now my husband will treat me like garbage, right? That wouldn't make any sense. But what does really Zayin Bet Lamed mean as garbage? It means fertilizer. It's the ultimate garbage. But fertilizer is valuable garbage. So where nowadays we might say zevel is a negative term, in traditional biblical Hebrew and Mishnaic Hebrew, Zayin Bet Lamed zevel did not mean garbage that is not valuable. It meant that which we might turn our noses up at, literally, but is something that's very valuable to us. It's fertilizer, right? That's, by the way, that's still how it's used in, at least among the agricultural community, where you have zevel is manure or it's fertilizer. And so if we were to, let's just see, by the way, who points that out. It's Bereshit Rabbah, it's the Medrash, in a very roundabout way, where the Medrash is understanding Zvadani Elokim oti zeved tov. God has given me a good portion. Hasadeh hazo kol zman she'ata mizabla u'ma'adra hi osa perot. It's as though Leah is referring to herself as a field and referring to her husband as the farmer. Every time you fertilize me, you bring your garbage, as it were, you bring manure and you tend to it, it's going to produce for you, right? Zvadani Elokim oti zeved tov. God has given me a good portion. He has made me fertile. I think that is the simplest way to understand this midrash. But what the midrash does here is it ties together Zvadani and Zevel. It alludes to the second half of Leah's naming. If the first half was Zvadani Elokim oti zeved tov, God has given me a good portion, which in the midrashic imagination is made me fertile. Hapam yizbaleni ishi. Once again, my husband has fertilized me. Once again, we have produced a son together because I have borne him not once, not twice, not three times, 6 sons. So the midrash very, very cleverly is collapsing the Zvadani and the Yizbaleni into the same concept of my good portion is my fertility, is my ability to produce children for Yaakov. Okay, so anyway, and here I just bring for you other examples. I don't want to belabor the point because I'd like to move on, but in Habakkuk and Tehillim, other examples of Zevel implying nobility and exaltedness. So Leah's naming of Zvulun is again entirely in a positive way, in a sense that we're not left thinking of any kinds of negative place that she might be in. She seems to be in a good place, if I could put it in modern parlance. And that positivity is echoed in the blessings of Yaakov and Moshe. And we don't know anything about Zvulun before we get to Yaakov and Moshe. So again, just like with Yisachar and Gad and Asher, Zvulun is a tribe whose biographical information is very, very limited. As one of the sons of Yaakov, we know more about him as a tribe, but in his lifetime, we don't know too much about him. But when it comes time to bless Zvulun, Zvulun by his father Yaakov, Yaakov says the following: Zvulun lechof yamim yishkon, v'hu lechof oniot, v'yarkato al Sidon. This is really very. Can everybody still see me? Because I see I've been frozen. Yeah, you can all still hear me. Okay, okay. Zvulun, it's a very interesting and unusual blessing because we are not really encountering the sea too much, right, in the book of Bereshit. And here, and in the stories of the Avot, for that matter, they do a lot of traveling, it is true, but they travel by land. And here, this tribe, or the son of Yaakov, is being blessed with a vision that almost stands outside of the lived experience of the nation or of the clan of Abraham up until this point. Zvulun shall dwell by the seashore. To him shall be it says here, haven for ships, or the shore for ships, V'yarkato al Sidon, and his flank shall be by Sidon. Sidon is one of the Phoenician coastal cities on what we would call the east coast of the Mediterranean, the west coast of Lebanon, Sidon, far up beyond modern day Israel. So it's a curious bracha, like again, a little foreign and a little almost unnerving, but it's a bracha that's deeply echoed, strongly echoed by Moshe. At the end of Moshe's life, he blesses Zvulun in a bracha that we saw last week as well. Ul Zvulun Amar, Zvulun Moshe said, Smach Zvulun b'tzeitecha v'yisachar ba'ohalecha. Let Zvulun rejoice. You Zvulun, you rejoice in your excursions, in your outings, while Yisachar will rejoice in his tents, will gain satisfaction staying put. Amim har yikra'u. Here I'm referring to Rashi's reading, which I had mentioned last week, creates a Yisachar sandwich. Zvulun, Yisachar, Zvulun. It's ABA. Zvulun is Samach Zvulun b'tzeitecha, Yisachar bo'alecha, then going back down to Zvulun. Amim har yikra'u, sham yizbechu zivchei tzedek. Ki shefa yamim yinaku usvunei tumunei chol. He shall call nations to the mount. There they shall offer righteous sacrifices, for they draw from they suckle from the wealth, the abundance of the seas, and the hidden treasures of the sand. So the seas and the sand and the excursions all are strong echoes of Yaakov's bracha for lechof yamim yishkon, lechof oniyot, yarkito al Sidon, the coastal city of Sidon. So we already can anticipate where our sages and our traditions will take Zvulun's legacy. We'll take his direction. What is Zvulun's concept? Before we get to Rabbeinu Bechaye, let's just start much, much earlier at the Sifrei. Sifrei Devarim, Rabbeinu Bechaye living as a Rishon in the 13th century, I believe it's the 13th century, and of course, Sifrei Devarim being a Sefer Midrash Halacha from the Tanaitic period, from our sages, from Chazal. So going back to the roots of how Chazal understand Zvulun's concept. Samach Zvulun b'tzeitecha. Here's the Midrash Halacha on Dvarim. Zvulun, rejoice in your outings. Melamed shahya Zvulun sarsur le'echav. Zvulun was his brother's middleman. He was a broker. It's a great translation. Vaya lokech me'achav. And he would take the wares and the produce that his brother would produce, umocher lagoyim, and sell it to the nations. And then he would take from the goods that the nations offered and sell them to his brother. What the Sifrei is saying here is that Zvulun belongs to the sea, in that the sea, for not only in the ancient world, but until the modern period, was the very symbol of interaction with the nations of the world, of not remaining closed onto oneself, but of engagement with the broader world, which you would which you would embark on from your ports and bring your wares that your native country produced to the other nations, and in turn you would bring their exotic ware back into your boundaries, into your borders. And so that would be why Zvulun would have been blessed with the seas, because he was always meant to be the entrepreneur, the businessman, the one who would represent Israel abroad. And this is developed further in the Tanhuma, in a very, very famous midrash, which specifies who exactly is the brother that Zvulun is representing. Is it all of Am Yisrael whose goods he is selling, or is it specifically his older brother Yisachar? So the Midrash says the latter. Zvulun lechof yamin. Now here the Tanhuma is commenting on Yaakov's bracha, not Moshe's bracha, the way we had seen in the Sifrei. Zvulun lechof yamim. Zvulun shall dwell by the shores, by the beach, by the sands. That they shall belong to him. It's his purview. And he points out, and the Midrash here points out something which I pointed out last week. And I'll point out again before we get deeply into the Midrash. You can't see it, but in the blessing of Yaakov to Zvulun, Zvulun comes before Yisachar. So first Yaakov blesses Zvulun, the younger brother, and then he blesses Yisachar, the older brother. It's the same here with Moshe. First, Moshe blesses Zvulun, the younger brother, and only then mentions Yisachar, the older brother, and then goes right back to Zvulun, who seems to eclipse the older brother Yisachar. Now, we're used to the younger brother eclipsing the older brother. It happens all the time. But perhaps in this iteration, it was something that might have escaped our radar. So the Midrash wants to make sure that we notice this. Kadam Zvulun Yisachar. Zvulun precedes Yisachar in the blessings that Yaakov gives to his sons. The Lama. Why is this so? Zvulun osek b'pragmatia, v'Yisachar osek b'Torah. Zvulun is busy with pragmatism or with business, while Yisachar is busy with learning Torah. Asu shutafut beinehem. This is a very famous 3 words of the Midrash. How do I know it's so famous? Because I'll regularly get mail asking me to engage in a Yisachar Zvulun relationship with some yeshiva or another. Okay, and they ask, will you be our shutafim? Like, will you be our Zvulun? Right? They made a agreement between them. But I think that we have to look very carefully at the terms of this agreement in order to understand the Zvulun Yisachar arrangement. They made an arrangement. Shehe pragmatia shel Zvulun Yisachar. where the pragmatism of Zvulun would serve Yisachar. Shekain Moshe Berachan, that's how Moshe blessed them. Smach Zvulun b'tzetecha, Zvulun, rejoice in your adventures, in your excursions. V'Yisachar bo alecha, and Yisachar in your staying put. Smach Zvulun b'tzetecha lepragmatia, mishum de Yisachar bo alecha osek b'Torah. Zvulun rejoiced in going out to engage in business so that Yisachar can remain in his tents and engage in Torah. And why would you be so joyous, Zvulun, in taking on the lion's share of the deal, right? Think about it this way, or I like to think about it this way. He who is sitting and studying Torah doesn't have to put bread on the table if his partner has committed to putting bread on the table. When you sit and you engage in Talmud Torah, it's joyous, it's delightful, it's energizing, but it is not it is not producing literally the bread that's on your table. The onus, the burden lies much more with he who has to actually put the bread on the table. And so we have to almost tell Zvulun, rejoice in your outings. You were the one who sought out this arrangement, as we'll see in a bit, that it was Zvulun's insight in approaching Yisachar and saying, this is something that I think we should engage in. Rejoice in your part of the arrangement, because because the Torah is the staff of life. Because through engaging in such an arrangement, you are supporting life itself, even though it might not seem as obvious, because you are actually the one who's bringing home the bacon or bringing home the bread, however you want it, the lamb bacon. Still, Zvulun might feel like you have the raw end of the deal. So samach Zvulun, rejoice in your excursions. Lefichach, and this sounds so modern, right? It sounds so apologetic, but it's an ancient midrash. It's in the Tanchuma and echoed elsewhere. Hikdim Zvulun li Yisachar. Zvulun is blessed before Yisachar. She'ilmale Zvulun lo asak Yisachar b'Torah. Were it not for Zvulun, Yisachar would never have the opportunity to sit in his tents and engage in Torah. And because Yisachar had this great gift of not needing to engage in the sale of his produce. It didn't say he didn't produce anything. It just meant that that burden was taken off. It's one thing to grow the melons in Emek Yisrael. It's another thing to have to sell them to Tarshish or to Sidon or to places farther afield. That was what Zvulun was tasked with. Lefichach katuv bo ubnei Yisachar yodei binal itim. That's why if we remember from last week's shiur, Yisachar had the minucha, vayar minucha kitov, ve'et haaretz ki ne'ema. He had the breadth of leisure. He had the great relief of not having to handle the business side of things, because that was taken over by Zvulun. So it allowed for him to develop this capacity to serve Israel as the indentured servant of the Shoel Umeshiv, of the rabbi who would provide for Israel's spiritual and halachic needs. Yisachar chamor gorem, Yisachar noten atzmo al Torah kechamor lemasui, Zvulun mevi b'oniyot haschora. Just so driving home this point of Yisachar and his blessing, that he gave himself over to Torah like a donkey gives himself over to the burden. He wasn't some a pseudo scholar, serious matmid, engaged in a very serious sense in Talmud Torah, and Zvulun would bring his wares, Yisachar's wares, in ships and take care of the business end of Yisachar's agriculture. Now, this is an idea which not only are we familiar with from mailings we might get, asking us to be the Zvulun. I don't know if anyone ever sends a mailing asking you to be the Yisachar to his Zvulun. That I haven't gotten, right? Does anyone ever get a mail say, please just sit and learn Torah and I will, and I will support you. It's almost always the other way around. Or I would imagine it's always the other way around. You get mailings from yeshivot asking if you will be their Zvulun and support them. But this idea of the supporter eclipsing the Ben Torah, as we saw in the order of the brachot, both of Yaakov and Moshe, is repeated again and again in different permutations. And I would like to bring another one here. It's from a different midrashic context in Vayikra Rabbah. And the midrash, just prior to this section that I bring you, had brought a teaching. It's not so much a halacha, but it was a teaching. And the question is, who gave the teaching? And there were different suggestions as to who was the one who thought of this novel idea. And we're going to one of the options here, and that's somebody named Shimon. There was somebody named Shimon who thought of this brilliant idea, but whenever we hear of this Shimon, he's always known to us as Shimon Achi Azariah. There are a number of cases throughout Talmudic literature where we have this sage, Shimon, the brother of Azariah. Amar Mishmo, he was the one who came up, he was the one who said it in the name of, he was the one who taught the idea. Now, here the Midrash says, wait a second, we know this Tana, I believe it's a Tana, not an Amora, from a number of different contexts. Why is he always called Shimon, the brother of Azariah? Valo Shimon haya gadol me Azariah? Wasn't Shimon older and greater than Azariah? Why would he be known as Shimon, the brother of Azariah? I guess, it would be kinds of like saying, I'm just trying to think of any random example. If Babe Ruth had a brother and his name was Joe, right? Babe, Joe's brother, right? Where Babe Ruth is clearly the more famous of the two, right? So why would he be known as Shimon, the brother of Azariah? It should be, if anything, Azariah, the brother of the great Shimon. But no, it was in exactly the same situation as Zvulun and Yisachar. But Azariah was the Zvulun. He was the one who supported his older brother Shimon, who was the scholar of the family. And that's why this sage will always be known as Shimon, the brother of Azariah. Though Azariah perhaps wasn't a great Torah scholar, he was the one who supported Shimon. And so therefore it's not a second, it's not like some kind of a secondary accolade. He gets the primary praise and the primary esteem. And the Midrash relates this back to the example of Zvulun and Yisachar. Zvulun Amar, Smach Zvulun b'tzeitecha v'Yisachar bo alecha. Just as we saw in the Tanchuma. V'lo Yisachar gadol hayam Zvulun. Wasn't Yisachar greater than Zvulun? As a Torah scholar, we hold the Torah scholars in most esteem. And not only that, he was older than Zvulun. Ela al yedei shaya Zvulun mefaresh miyishuv. Zvulun was the one who braved the open seas and all of the dangers, the dangers on so many levels, financial dangers, physical dangers of being involved in having to market the goods and actually bring home the bread to put on the table. And he would be responsible for feeding Yisachar. Okay, another example of this, and before we move on to other elements of Yisachar, is that the famous, much later example of Maimonides, of the Rambam. Now, the Rambam himself, one can argue, took care of business, in that the Rambam is an example that is brought of a prime example of Torah Umada, not only someone who was an extreme scholar in both Torah and in the sciences, but also someone who it seemed supported himself. But if one examines the biography of Maimonides, that was only the case in the latter half of his life. Initially, asu shutafut beinehem, he had an agreement with his brother. The worst disaster, and here I'm reading from Maimonides' personal correspondence of 1185, from as he talks about how his brother David had supported him for many years when he lived not in Fustat. I don't remember wherever he lived prior, and he was able to sit and study because his brother David supported him. The worst disaster that struck me of late, worse than anything I had ever experienced from the time I was born until this day, was the demise of that upright man who drowned in the Indian Ocean while in possession of much money belonging to me, to him, and to others, leaving a young daughter and his widow in my care. And he's talking about his brother David, and the poignancy here is that David actually he drowned. He was engaging in commerce on the seas. For about a year from the day the evil tidings reached me, I remained prostrate in bed with a severe inflammation, fever, and mental confusion, and almost perished. From then until this day, that is about 8 years, I have been in a state of disconsolate mourning. How can I be consoled? For he was my son. Literally, he was his brother. He grew up on my knees. He was my brother, my pupil. It was he who did business in the marketplace, earning a livelihood, while I dwelled in security. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry. Apologies. Apologies for that. Okay, so another example of a Yisachar Zvulun relationship where Rambam is, even though he doesn't use those terms, is essentially the Yisachar, and his brother David was the Zvulun, and had supported him until his demise. Okay, so I just want to share with you before we go into some other aspects of Zvulun. I want to share what I think is the greatness of Zvulun, and I'll do so just by reading a couple of lines. Eh, okay. Zvulun had no concrete assets over those of his brothers. To an earlier page. Yes. He was not one who, and in contrast to the steady donkey, I put it like that, of Yisachar, Zvulun was an agile ship, always seeking new initiatives, dwelling by the ever-changing sea. He was the entrepreneur of the family, comfortable with the excitement of the unexpected. Like all entrepreneurs, Zvulun was unusually mindful of potential partnerships and mutually beneficial arrangements. Seeing in his older brother tremendous potential for the depth and knowledge that can come only through many hours of diligent study, he suggested that they capitalize on their respective strengths. And here I quote a midrash that it was Zvulun's initiative. Zvulun, the astute businessman, would act as Yisachar's agent, selling the produce gleaned from his brother's fertile fields. So with this arrangement, Zvulun secured something of the eternal, while Yisachar, in turn, procured something of the dynamic. Like all true partnerships, both sides were enriched by the other's strengths. So I think that it is fair to look at the ideal of Yisachar and Zvulun partnership, not as some kind of a business arrangement so that the businessmen can secure olam haba, or however it's termed nowadays, with the way that this term is used nowadays, the Yisachar Zvulun arrangement, but rather that both sides recognize the potential of the other and work together to elevate each other. And this was Zvulun's natural abilities, as made clear in the brachot of Yaakov and Moshe. Because again, to be out in the seas is to require a personality or a character that is savvy and effective at producing for Am Yisrael in a way that the landlocked or the tent-locked Yisachar would not be nearly as effective. Now, this is where I think we should all be very surprised. So when we actually take a look at Zvulun's Nachala, we would expect Zvulun's Nachala to be Lechof Aniyot, That is what Yaakov and Moshe had promised. Tzidon, all the way up here off of our map. We would expect Zvulun to be here on the coast, whether it would be Dor or Haifa or Akko, but to definitely control the northern ports. Here we see that Zvulun is entirely landlocked. I love, this is where I live. Well, this is not my map, and it's not a great map either. Yisachar is also up here. I live up here, and I love guiding Nachalat Zvulun. Nachalat Zvulun, for those who are familiar with Israel's north, is a lot of hills and vales. It's like it literally is the best example of the closest parallel to Tuscany, I think, that Israel has. I'll show you a quick video. See if I can just load that up over here. Here's Bikat Beit Netofa after the rains. And a lot of these lovely, here you see some higher mountain ranges and lower valleys, but for the most part, getting back over here, you can see that it is, or trust me on this, it's a lot of low hills and valleys, very gorgeous, but definitely landlocked. And here as well, you can see that they did not get the coast. And we'll get to that in the last 5 minutes of the shiur. But the Midrash acknowledges this. The Midrash here in Masechet Megillah, which is discussing walled cities from the time of Yehoshua, because we're in the tractate that deals with the reading of the Megillah and the laws related to the reading of walled cities and non-walled cities, is discussing the city of Tzipori. Tzipori is one of the cities, it's right over here. It's like right in the center of Zvulun, right over here. Tzipori is identified as biblical Kitron. Kitron is listed as one of the cities of Zvulun in the book of Yehoshua. Zvulun didn't manage to drive out the inhabitants of Kitron and the inhabitants of Nahalal. For those who have heard of Nahalal, it's right near Tzipori, the first moshav in Israel. Zvulun, but meaning in the modern period. Zvulun mitra'ema midotzav hava. Zvulun, he chafed at the confines of his Nachalah. He didn't like his Nachalah. And how do we know this? Because in Shirat Dvorah, in the great paean of praise, that is the Song of Deborah in the 5th chapter of the book of Judges, she says about Zvulun am cheref nafsho lamut. Zvulun was a people that was so injured unto death. They were so aggrieved that it's a difficult verse here. It says jeopardize their lives to death, but they were very upset. Matam, why were they so upset? Mishum de Naftali Marome Sadeh. Because they saw, this is the Maharsha's insight on this Gemara, when Zvulun was called over here to Har Tavor and to Kedesh Naphtali of Barak, because that he was the general of that story of Dvorah, then they left the confines of their very difficult Nachalah, and they went over to see all of the luscious plains and easy farmland of Yisachar and Naphtali. And as someone who lives in the farmland of both Yisachar and Naphtali, I can say that it's just flat, very easy plains, easy to produce produce and to grow things. And so Maharsha says when Zvulun went over was called to war and saw the nachalot of Naphtali and Yisachar, then he became very aggrieved. And he says, Ribono shel olam, Master of the universe, la'achai natata lahem sadot ukramim. To my brothers Yisachar and Naphtali, you give sadot and kramim, you give fields and vineyards. Velina tata harim ukvaot, and to me you give what I just showed you was gorgeous, Bikat Beit Netofa, and that's the landscape of Zvulun, but it's much harder for in the ancient period to actually produce produce in such a landscape. Velina tata yamin v'naharot. Beyond that, you've also given me seas and rivers, the waterways, which we'll get to in just one second. Amar lo, and God responds to him, Kulan tzrichin lach al yedei chilazon. Don't you worry, Zvulun. Everybody is going to need you because they're all going to need the murex snail. They're all going to need you for the tchelet dye that's produced by the murex snails, which are in Chovdor in the on the coast over here, which is going to be your purview. Shne'emar, Amim har yikru'u, nations will call to you, nations in this midrashic sense, meaning the nations of Israel, to get to the treasures buried in the sand, the chilazon, which will produce that prized tchelet dye, which all of Israel is in need of. So God is saying, don't worry, Zvulun. Even if you feel aggrieved, even if you feel disenfranchised, whether it's because of your nachala or whether it's because of your role in Israel, you are essential to the national story, that the nation will need you for the chilazon. I want to get to this idea of the midrash pointing out the connection of the chilazon with Zvulun in just one second. But first, I'll try and address what I think is the burning question here, which is how do the blessings of Yaakov and Moshe square away with the contours of Zvulun's entirely landlocked nachala? First of all, his landlocked nachala is described for us in Yehoshua Yetet, and in Sefer Yehoshua itself. This isn't some kinds of of a flight of fancy. This map again isn't the best map, but Zvulun is definitely described as being penned in on all sides by the other tribes, and Asher is the tribe that gets the bulk of the northern coast. So I think that there's the prime way to reconcile the discrepancy here is quite simple, and it is to say that Zvulun had control of the ports. In other words, this is the nachala of Zvulun. The sea is the nachala of Zvulun. It's where he feels most comfortable. It's where he is most adept. It's where he shines. And so he is the one who engages in all of that which the sea has to offer, and perhaps also controls the ports. Just because it fell in the Nachala of Asher doesn't mean that port cities, for those who play Settlers of Catan, we can all attest to this, doesn't mean that the ports themselves were necessarily in control of the tribes to whom they fell in the Nachalot. So it could very well be that Zvulun controlled the ports and, of course, controlled the seas. I don't see a discrepancy there. Alternatively, Rav Yoel ben Nun, a very famous and well-cited scholar of biblical geography and Tanakh, suggested that Zvulun initially was given a coastal nachala, but then because he was so late in claiming it, was given a much more limited nachala inland, as we see the contours here. Conceptually, I do prefer the first answer just because to me it's just the simplest and makes sense. One does not get a nachala of the seas officially. One just claims a nachala of the seas based on his personality. So that is as far as that discrepancy is concerned. Two final things I'd like to discuss about Zvulun. One is this idea of the chilazon that I'm looping back to because it is specified in this midrash here in the Gemara. What does it mean that Zvulun was given the chilazon? The chilazon, of course, is the symbol, is what is produced from the chilazon, from this snail, this murex snail, is the dye with which we dye our tchelet, ptil tchelet, our tchelet string of our our tzitziot. So I'll just read to you here some reflections on what it means that Zvulun was granted the enterprise of the chilazon. The straightforward intent of this midrash was that Zvulun would always be wealthy, no matter how fickle the seas. If there was an off year, if Tarshish wasn't interested in melons any specific year, it didn't matter because he always provided the chilazon snail to the rest of Am Yisrael. This snail was harvested from the northern shores of Israel. By the way, it still is. For those who are interested in modern day tchelet manufacture, you go up to the north of Israel and explore it in that context, an area that fell under Zvulun's purview. Now, I suggest, though, that God's response to Zvulun addressed more than the anxiety over his capricious nachala, where Zvulun was saying, "My nachala isn't enough." That's why he was am cherev nafsho lamut. Zvulun was a trader, acting primarily as an agent, facilitating others' fortune. He was the middleman who regularly entered dangerous waters with no promise of a happy outcome, right? When you enter a business arrangement, you're not sure that it's going to be lucrative in the end. He provided for others' well-being, whether it was Jacob's wealth, Leah's security, or Yisachar's freedom. He was always involved in pragmatia, business, entrepreneurship, always looking for the next hot deal, never sitting still. He was the ultimate worldly shevet, immersed in the here and now. When God gifted Zvulun with the chilazon, he was gifting him with another dimension, because the chilazon represents the metaphysical. Right? I bring you here this midrash. You can read it in Masechet Sotah. You can read it in English. What is manashalat tchelet mikol minei tzivonin? What's different? Because from all other colors, tchelet represents the kisei hakavod. It represents the Ein Sof, the metaphysical. So though Zvulun was busy with matters of pragmatia, to his lot fell the tchelet, which was a symbol of the otherworldly. Just a few more lines on this note, and then the final thing I'd like to say on Zvulun. It was not Yaakov and Moshe alone, God intimated, who took note of your overtures to Yisachar. Do not be discouraged, Zvulun. To you alone, who compromises all the time your personal safety, who relinquishes your serenity, and who toils selflessly to help others realize their destinies, is dominion of the Tchelet. And to you alone are the material and spiritual blessings of the blue mysterious seas. It was not only Zvulun's sacrifice that made him worthy of the Tchelet. It was his very unrootedness, his dynamism and creativity that allowed him to leap from sea to sky and onto the Kisei HaKavod. So I think of this midrash in Megillah as an opening to understanding another dimension of Zvulun, not just his pragmatia, not just his acute and astute business sense, but his ability to achieve something for Am Yisrael, something of the metaphysical, something of the dynamic that perhaps would have been missing otherwise from Am Yisrael, that we need this sarsur, the broker shevet, to achieve for us. And though I have 1 minute left, and if you have to go, I totally understand. I'm going to give myself an additional 5 minutes just to cover this final aspect of Zvulun, because I think of it as so important. When one is engaged in commerce, when one is engaged with the broader world and delivering to the broader world and bringing in from the broader world back into the shores of Eretz Yisrael, one is not only an entrepreneur and a businessman, one is also an ambassador, presenting the best of what Israel has to offer to others and bringing them to us. And so it is with that Rashi will interpret the blessing of Moshe to Zvulun, that last final verse, Amim har yikru'u. Who are the people that are being called to the mountain? You can please read along in Hebrew or in English here, where the ambassador of Israel, Zvulun, who's engaging with the nations of the world, they're coming into Chof Dor, they're coming into Namal Akko, and trading with Zvulun. We've taken so much trouble to get here. Let's go do some sightseeing. And Zvulun says, come on down to Jerusalem, right? Zvulun is the one who brings these nations, Sham Yizbechu Zivchei Tzedek. There they will engage and meet Israel. There they will encounter Israel. So Zvulun acts as the ambassador of Israel to the nations of the world, not luring in a negative sense, but bringing them in to experience Israel. And the ultimate, if we've been talking up until now of always having a golden boy or a golden girl of each shevet, if Barak was the golden boy of Naphtali and Serach was the golden girl of Asher, so the golden boy of Zvulun is Yona ben Amitai, Migat HaChefer. Gat Hefer is a village that is allotted to Zvulun. We know this from Sefer Yoshua, where Gat Hefer is listed in his Nachala, and I pass by Gat Hefer at least once a week. It's right over here, and it's quite an interesting tell. By the way, Gat Hefer is located right next to the Arab village of Mashhad. Mashhad, if you hear the word shahid, which we know means a martyr, right? Nowadays, it has a very negative connotation for us because it means someone who's essentially a terrorist, right? Who martyrs himself in jihad. But Mashhad was named after Yona ben Amitai, the shahid, the holy one, the martyr. Everywhere that you go in Mashhad, you will have a restaurant called Nabi Yunus. You'll have a church called Nabi Yunus. You have a mosque called Nabi Yunus. You have the kever of Nabi Yunus, the kever of Yonah Hanabi, Nabi Yunus, because they retained that tradition that Mashhad is Gad Hefer. So Yonah ben Amitai, who is the son of Zvulun. He's from Zvulun. So where am I here? Here we go. Yonah is, and I don't have time here to go through the whole, is he from Asher or is he from Zvulun? Let's just jump straight to Rabbi Yochanan. Imo me Asher v'avi mi Zvulun. His tribal apportionment, his tribal identity was Zvulun. And this, the idea of Yonah from Zvulun, who is getting on a ship, right? And who is going and who is meant to be the ambassador. God appoints him as the only prophet who is meant to travel abroad and deliver prophecy to the nations of the world. Now, that's not to say that other prophets didn't prophesize to the other peoples of the world. Yeshayahu, Amos, Nahum, many other prophets had prophecies. Ovadja had prophecies for the other peoples of the world. But Yonah is the only one who actually is meant to go out, and he goes out by ship, and he is essentially entombed by the sea. He returns to his very natural nachala in the sea when he is cast overboard. By the way, just look at this hint, this marvelous allusion in Sefer Yonah to Zvulun. Vayiru ha'anashim yir'a gedola. The people who are on the ship, the sailors, had a great fear once the waters abated, once the choppy seas stopped, once Yonah was thrown overboard. Yir'a gedola tashem vayizbechu zevach laHashem vayidru nedarim, and they offered zevach. They offered sacrifices, which is a clear allusion to the verse in Dvarim, which is Amim har yikra'u sham yizbechu zivchei tzedek. So Yonah is the ambassador of Am Yisrael. And I'll just point out one more aspect, because our time is very short, in this midrash. Vayered Yafo vayimtza oniya ba'ar Tarshish. This is this verse from Yonah where he went down to Yaffo and found a boat heading to Tarshish when he was meant to go east to Nineveh. He heads west to Tarshish. Is the realization of v'hu lechof oniyot, of the blessing that is it that I believe it's Yaakov. No, yes, that Yaakov gives to Zvulun. Amar Rabbi Yonah. I love this. Of course, it has to be Rabbi Yonah who gives the following. Tanur and Amora, a sage, who has the following to say about Yonah Hanavi. Yonah ben Amittai, me'olei regalim hava. Yonah ben Amittai loved going to Yerushalayim. He would take his donkey, and it's been done before, by the way, by a fellow who I know quite well, Menachem Goldberg. For those who have come up and have gone to Kfar Kedem in Hoshaya, it's close to ancient Sipori. He's the one who runs that wonderful facility. He once, years ago, from Zvulun, from Nachalat Zvulun, took his donkey and with some of his children and made the journey down to Yerushalayim just to see how one would get from Nachalat Zvulun down to Yerushalayim. Whether he realized it or not, he was following in the footsteps of Yonah ben Amittai from Gat Chefer. Yonah ben Amittai loved going to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festivals. V'nechnas l'simchat Beit HaShoeva v'sharta alav Ruach HaKodesh. And what was his favorite one? Of course, it was the water drawing festival, because a Ben Zvulun, of course, is going to be drawn to the one annual festival in the Beit HaMikdash that involves water, the Simchat Beit HaShoeva of Sukkot. And the Shechina would rest on him there. And it would cause him great joy. So I find that Yonah, as the ambassador of Israel, reluctant ambassador, but still effective ambassador, and his whole story and this added wrinkle introduced to us by, not wrinkle, this added layer introduced to us by Rabbi Yonah, brings the story of Zvulun full circle. So in a 30-second recap of Zvulun before we have to leave for the next few months and then Bezrat Hashem regroup after the Chagim, Zvulun is the final son of Leah, is the ultimate expression of her abnormal, abundant gift. And she was given this portion that has cemented her place in the family and has cemented her role as Yaakov's house. Hapam yizbaleni ishi. Now I am in residence, permanent residence with my husband in an exalted state, for he has fertilized me. And we saw the blessings of Yaakov and Moshe, our blessings of abundance of wealth produced by being the entrepreneur of the family, by being the dynamic, exciting, enthusiastic, adventurous Shevet who will engage in commerce on behalf of his brethren, specifically Yisachar, and will take the risks that are necessary to become the startup nation and succeed with the chutzpah that Zvulun brings to the family, representing us as ambassadors to the rest of the world and inviting the rest of the world back to Yerushalayim, Amim Harikru, Sham Yizbechu Zivchei Tzedek, and embodied in the person of Yonah ben Amittai, who was the ultimate ambassador of Am Yisrael, and who also loved to be in Yerushalayim. Okay, Amim Harikru with Yonah ben Amittai. So now I will take any questions. Okay, let's see. Oh, okay. Climate change. Okay. Yes, I'm not laughing at that. I think it's we'll have to see how that shapes up. Okay. More on climate change. Sources are here. Thank you. In Sfardi, we celebrate, but thank you, Renee. Thank you for looping me back. There's a formal tekes, yes, called a zeved bat. Now, why is the tekes of the ceremony for a baby girl called a zeved bat? Because the birth of Dinah, which is the only daughter mentioned of Yaakov, we don't know if he had other daughters, but at least this is the only one we know of, follows immediately after Zvulun. And she's not, there's no expansion when it comes to Dinah as to why she was named Dinah. There's no expansion as to the circumstances of her birth. And Radak, and I don't know what his source is on this because I didn't look too deeply into it, but Radak on the verse of Zvulun came right before Dinah, said that, the verse on Dinah says, interestingly, with Dinah, we never see that Leah was pregnant. It just says that a girl was born to Leah. not that she conceived and gave birth to Dinah, but a girl was born to her, leading for Radak to suggest that Dinah is intricately linked to Zvulun. Perhaps they were twins. There's a midrashic motif that they were that another son was meant to be born. Perhaps a twin was meant to be born to Zvulun, and Rachel or Leah, two different versions of the midrash, prayed that it not be a boy and it be a girl. And they actually, the lashon of one of the versions of the midrash is "Dailas chorim." We have too many boys. Enough. We need some girls. And so a Zeved bat is linked back to that her triumphant expression, Leah's exuberance upon the birth of Zvulun, Zvadani Elokim Zeved Tov. And so that Zeved Tov is assigned to the birth of a girl, because these two children are linked. Akkadian, not to repeat, yes. Yes, Akkadian, the ancient language, the language of ancient Akkad. Yes, I've worked hard to stress this. No midrashic motif ever says Yisachar doesn't work. If anything, he might work very, very hard as a shoel umeshiv, as a rabbi, but there's no leisure associated with the chamor of Yisachar.
I feel that
Yeah.
it's misleading today what you hear from the yeshivot, that Yisachar deserves to be supported without any work. And it's very different from the way you've presented it to us.
Absolutely. And I think that were we to, and I think that the sources speak for themselves. I don't think this is my massaging of the sources at all. I think it is very, very clear. And when it comes to my chapter on Yisachar, I have the footnotes are just like they're deep anchors, like they're strong anchors with source after source after source that talk either about Yisachar as a farmer or more strongly as Yisachar as a producer of applied Torah. So applied Torah to me could mean that somebody turns to a Yisachar-like figure and says, I will support you in your learning. I expect you to be a teacher. I expect you to produce a sefer. I expect you to go on a lecture circuit, whatever it may be, where the service to the nation is something that is very, very understood and concrete. So absolutely. Oh, thank you, Rivka. That was a lot of fun. Yes, Sipori is one of the main cities of Zvulun. It seems Zvulun and his brother Yisachar, with all their trading and connections with different nations, might have inspired some people to embrace our faith. Yes, and Renee, you're talking about also not only one of the midrash that I brought here about Amim Har Yikru, like calling nations to sightsee a little bit in Israel, but a midrash that I brought last week where Zvulun is presenting this gorgeous fruit that Yisachar is producing, and the nations are like, these are fabulous shkedim, right? Fabulous almonds, and Zvulun's like, you think these are great? You should come and see the farmers who are producing them. So it's an effective ambassadorship and representation. It's interesting to think about how our unique religious practices could have spread through their commerce and interactions. Yes, Yonah being the prime example, where whether or not he intended, he caused a mass conversion of the sailors on the ship that was heading towards Tarshish, where it's very clear in the verse that they offered sacrifices to God, Hashem. Yes, if you have a Zvulun in the family, then yes. Yonah was a reluctant prophet, but he still was our ambassador prophet. I never thought about that. Zevach with a yeah, we should, because it rounds it. The question here is, do you connect Zevach to the other Zayin Bet words in the blessing? If Zayin Bet is the main motif of Leah's blessing, the linguistic motif, right? Zebed, Yizbaleni, etc. Then at the end of Moshe's bracha to Zvulun, we also have Sham Yizbechu Zivchei Tzedek. Yizbechu Zivchei Tzedek, which I would imagine, although I haven't looked into it, thank you for directing my attention to it, might very well be at least an earworm. I don't know if that's the right word, but hearkening back to Zvulun's initial concept. Spirit of entrepreneurship and the willingness to take risks. Absolutely. Okay, thank you. And if there are any other questions, then I'm happy to take them now.
I have a quick question. Excuse my
Yes.
interruption. Sorry. In your source sheet,
Mhm.
I don't know what page. Oh, page 2. I just noticed it says Genesis 49:13. Zebulun shall dwell by the seashore. He shall have a haven for ships, and his flank. That's a military flank shall rest on Sidon, and I find that that's almost like Hashem's plan. I mean, you know what I mean? Like placing them there.
Yarkato al Tzidon. Yeah, now as far as Zvulun and hold on, I'm trying to just get back to seeing. Okay. So Yarkato al Tzidon, it means literally his thigh, right? Like, but it has different applications. I don't know about the military application of that, although Zvulun was very successfully was praised by Dvorah for coming to help Bnei Yisrael in their battle against Yavin and Sisera in the Book of Judges. But that it I have to say I'm not sure. All I can say is Yarkato al Sidon is one of the midrashic bases for saying that when Eliyahu Hanavi in the Book of Kings was told to go visit the widow of Sarfat, which is up by Sidon, then the boy who was resuscitated by him there is Yonah ben Amittai, which is why there's this machloket as to whether he's from Asher or from Zvulun, because that's Sidon is by Asher, meaning that the yerach, the thigh, is a buzzword for loin, right? It means like the reproductive organs. So like that which was produced by the widow of Tzarfat would have been Yonah ben Amittai. Like that's my only.
It is mind-boggling because then
Wild.
I see the word flank, and we literally live on an Air Force base, right, in
Yeah.
Delaware, and then I see flank, and I'm thinking military, because flank armies,
Right.
strategic,
Right.
like
But I think flank
placement.
more is leg. You know,
Thank
like
you so
it is a
much.
leg, right?
Wonderful. These are wonderful shorts. Thank you so much for answering
Pleasure.
my
My
questions.
pleasure. My pleasure. B'simcha. Are there any other questions? It's been a real pleasure, everyone. And please do keep in touch. And if anyone ever wants to tour Nachalat Zvulun, that would be my absolute pleasure. And if I don't hear from you or see you, then I hope to see you over Elul in the Elul Yom Iyun and then following the Chagim. So I'll just wish everyone a happy Elul and Hamelch Basadeh. And I hope that we get to see each other soon. Okay. Be well.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.